Time for some fan questions.
Hey Chael, recently Dana talked about a fight with Khabib and JSP, but he's not mentioning Tony, so what the fuck?
Okay, I think I know what you mean by that. Yeah. So here's what happened. Everybody in this triangle, and it is a triangle, right? Dana's here, Khabib's over here, Tony's over here. There's your triangle. Everybody in that pyramid is saying Tony versus Khabib. Somebody's not coming to the table. That I can tell you. And the emergence of a GSP, said by Dana White, who's on top, is a tactic. It's a tactic to let whoever isn't coming, for whatever reason they're not, know I will move on. Oh, and by the way, on this chessboard, it's my board. Oh, and by the way, the pieces that you don't think are there, they're my pieces, and I can move them. So unless you want to checkmate, agree to fight.
Hey, Chael. I was just wondering, what do you think makes the Olympics first, jiu-jitsu or MMA? And if MMA makes the Olympics, what kind of modifications do you think will need to be done to the sport to make it fit with the Olympics? Thank you. Big fan.
Okay, so I got to change your question, and I'll tell you why. Let's make it about MMA versus grappling, and that term matters. The term jiu-jitsu will never be in the Olympics, in your eyes' lifetime. But grappling does have a very good likelihood and a current push that's going on. Now, of course, we're largely talking about jiu-jitsu, right? If you go look at the rules of they're very similar to many of the rules of many of the respected organizations that do grappling. But the semantics are relevant. The semantics do matter. And grappling is right now currently being contested on the world stage by an organization known as UWW, which is the world governing body of both freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling. They have recently adapted beach wrestling, you probably didn't know about, and they've adapted something called grappling, which is, I think, what you're calling jiu-jitsu. That is far more likely. But if you want a quick history lesson, MMA used to be in the Olympics. In fact, I don't know how MMA ever got the term MMA, right? Like if a sport, I don't think somebody could come along tomorrow and rename football and then make up a word. If you're doing football, I'm pretty sure we have to call it football. The sport of MMA is actually a sport known as pankration. Pankration is the former national sport of the country of Greece that was even contested in the Olympic Games up until 1904. Now, it never moved from that, but that was also the original Olympics, and they debuted in Greece. So they put the sport in, and then they said, you know what, moving forward, we're going to take pankration out, which is nothing more than MMA. We're going to take pankration out, but we're going to leave elements of it in. By example, the wrestling. By example, the boxing. By example, taekwondo. By example, judo. But we're going to, if you try to do it all at once, which is pankration, which is what you're calling MMA, we're going to take it out. There was a push by the National Pankration Association to re-get in to the Olympic Games. That association is weak, it's small, and it's very poorly funded. Very good people with a very good idea, and I wish they would get it. But when you're dealing with the International Olympic Committee, you got to have organization, you got to have respect, and you got to have money. It's just the way that it goes. Grappling, because of its support from UWW, will definitely get to some of those thresholds much faster.
Hi Chael, Patrick here from Scotland. What are your thoughts on Anderson Silva versus George St. Pierre? Could it still happen?
So Anderson versus George St. Pierre, yes, it could still happen. I mean, you said could it still happen? I feel like anything has to be a yes if you say could. That fight will not happen. Well, let's just, for fun, let's just say it did. That fight still works. There would still be some excitement there. Yeah, that could fill up an arena in many places. That fight is one of the misses for me as a fan that we never got to see. Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, Matt Hughes, prior to George's emergence. Those guys had some chatter going. Anderson Silva, John Jones, those guys had some talk going. Don't forget, it wasn't that long ago. It was March of last year when guys really got to change weight classes, right? And some people will say, well, it was the Conor versus Eddie night, but I feel like that was a little bit different just because Conor had outgrown 145. But, March of last year is when Daniel and Stipe went at, and all of a sudden those floodgates open, and all of a sudden the practices of the industry quickly changed. Pitbull's doing it over in Bellator. Ryan Bader's doing it over in Bellator. But I mean, as an industry as a whole, that changed. And I do look back and go, man, we can't get that one back. But that would have been a very fun fight at one time. And both of those guys were talking about it. If I remember correctly, and I think I do, it was more of a weight dispute where George is going, look, if we're going to do the fight, where are we going to do it at? Is he coming down to 170? I can tell you now, I'm not going to 85. So if we're just doing this on a one-off and a catch weight and there's no strap on the line, okay, fine. But we got to agree on a weight class. And it kind of just threw everything off at the time.
Hi, Chael Sonnen. It's Steve Phillips from the mean streets of Dillon, Washington. Good buddies with Dennis Superman Hallman and Benji Raddick. I had a question. My buddy Bryan Caraway just fought on Battlefield FC over in China, and they stiffed all the fighters on their pay. What happens there? How does that end? What does that look like? Do they just get stiffed, or do they have options they can do? Thanks, buddy.
Oh, first off, hello to our mutual friends. And second off, I didn't know that happened. I did not know that happened to Bryan. Yeah, here's the way that goes. Nothing. There will be no recourse. Let's say Bryan's pay was 10 grand, which is probably a pretty good guess by me. It would cost him 40 to fight that thing. They know that. To lawyer up and come overseas and get an international attorney and fly back and battle that, it's going to cost you 4 times what we owe you. That's the level of math that we're doing. You're not going to come after us. Those guys could, if it was in the States, simply file bankruptcy, and even if there was a judgment, they wouldn't have to pay it. Now, the reason I offer you that, I mean, any of these fly-by-night guys, got to have a good manager, right? You got to get it in escrow. You got to get paid in advance. Most companies won't do that. In truth, you ask, they won't do it. But they would pay a name guy like Bryan half in advance, right? Let's say his purse is 50 grand. Throw out a different number than I did before. It's 50 grand. They would send him 25 in advance. Here's half of it. I'm trusting you. Pro wrestling works the same way because you're dealing with real shoddy promoters. And they don't usually get it in advance, but they get it as soon as they get off the airplane, right? The promoter's there to pick them up. Boom. Half of my money right now. Take me to the hotel. I'll see you at the venue later. I do my part. I get the other half of the money. It's a very dirty business. And I can tell you, even America, it used to be. And that used to be exactly what guys did, particularly before the internet. They could get away with it, right? You could pack up and go to a different town. Rest of the world wouldn't even know where you were going. They couldn't follow you there and try to track you down if they wanted to. They wouldn't know where to serve you if they wanted to. Promoters would do that. The promoter would be gone before the fighters ever got out of the ring. Oh, there's going to be a post-fight press conference and a big party afterwards, and we're all going to square up there. And tears down. He's headed to the next city with the ring on the truck, never goes to the after party, leaves everybody hanging. It was a very common thing. Commission stepped in. They set up escrow accounts, surety bonds, a lot of ways to go back on the promoter and make sure that the fighters were protected. But to answer your question in no uncertain terms, Bryan is not, sadly, he's not getting paid.
Hey Chael, who is the real baddest dude in the UFC? If we go back to old school rules, no weight classes, no rounds, who's the baddest? Is it Khabib? Will he just sit in the tiramisu buffet line until he's having enough to defeat John Jones? Is it John Jones? Is it Stipe? Is it some kind of jiu-jitsu guy who can work all day on the ground? What do you think?
Oh, the baddest dude ever. Now, that's an interesting question that you're asking because you're saying if we go to the old school rules, where there's no time limits, there's no rounds, there's no weigh-ins, there's no gloves if they don't want to wear them. But we apply all the athletes that have ever done it to that rule set. That's how I'm hearing this question. That would be speculative at best, but you would have to, at the top of your list, turn to endurance. Who can hold up the longest? Then you would also want to look at skills, and you would want to look at size. I heard you throw out the name John Jones. In a battle that never ended, under the old, no rounds and no way to stop it, he would be right at the top. He would be amongst the top. I heard you say Khabib. I love Khabib's skills, but no, he would have some big problems with some of the size. When it never stops and no rounds, Royce Gracie style, John would be towards the top. Stipe is likely to be the one. Likely. Cormier is somewhere in that mix, right? Because size would really matter. Size would really matter with today's skills. Back when they were doing it in the early 90s and bringing in the small guy to beat up the big guys all sucked back then, right? That was kind of by design. Hey, you got to be a really big guy, but you don't get to have any skills. All right, best of luck. Here's your mouthpiece. Get it, right? They brought in sumo guys. And There's a level of ridiculous to just show that a little guy could beat a big guy, but one of the elements and ingredients that by the matchmakers was the big guy gets to have the size, but he didn't get to have any tools. So size would matter in this. I'm going to rewrite your question. You take a whole bunch of badasses, you put them in an alley, who comes walking out? I believe the favorite there would be Stipe. But to your point, John Jones would do very well. I guess I'm going to leave it at that. You know what? It just might come down to those two.
Chael, Ethan Kovac here. First of all, I want to say thank you for getting me into the sport of mixed martial arts. If it was not for me seeing your pre-fight press conference with Tito Ortiz, where you verbally assaulted the man on the mic, then I would have never come to indulge myself in the sport and come to appreciate the combat side of the sport and the business side of the sport. Okay, great. My question for you, Chael, is recently you posted a video about Tony and Habib where you said you don't believe that it's Habib not coming to the table. You believe it's Tony. I agree with this statement, but I think we all know why. Dana is lowballing Tony for this. Should Tony shut up and take the fight and cash out after he beats Habib Nurmagomedov? Notice I said beat, not fight. Or should he try to get his bag before the fight and risk this falling out for the 5th time now? And finally, where does the Nogueira brothers feeding a bus a carrot fit into all of this? Thank you, Chael.
That was tremendous, and you also paid a few very sweet compliments to me. Thank you for that. Okay. Look, here's the thing. And there's a few masters you have to serve here. Right out of the gate, you're talking about Khabib, you're talking about Tony. Both of those guys have contracts, period. They signed contracts. For them to be expected to honor those contracts is a very real thing. Now, you then have what's called a standard of the industry. And all industries have to follow this. One of the standards of this industry is if a fight is big enough and or hard enough that you can turn the gun back on the boss and go to hell with that contract, here's what I'm going to need to go out and do that job. I don't love that, but I must admit over time that precedent has been established. So if Tony wanted to use that chip right now and go, look, that's a huge fight and that's a big fight, and if he's getting $6 million, which he foolishly made public, I now get to come in with a little something as well. I've also got a streak. I've also got a fan base. I've also got a time. Right? You hear all of these arguments. Ultimately, you want a guy to just honor his contract. That's what you want. But yes, Tony does have the right to come in, but he can also shoot himself in the foot. I mean, we've seen this happen a million times. And by no stretch of the imagination, from a business standpoint, do you need that fight to happen. That fight was promised 4 times and fell through 4 times. Do you think anybody over there on the other side of the tracks didn't have a nice holiday because that fight didn't happen? You see the problem? And guys end up in this position all the time where they think a fight has to happen. Here, let me just put this in perspective for you. When I was getting ready to fight Anderson Silva for the 2nd time, that was the biggest fight in the sport that you could make at that time. When that fight went off, we broke every single record, all of them. From digital views to pay-per-view to live gate, which is disclosed for everybody to see. No embellishment here, but there's some numbers that you get, there's some numbers that you don't. We broke all the records. If you know what I had to do to get that fight, and I don't mean just flying around the world and beating guys up and flying around the world and doing media tours. I don't mean that. I had to chase Dana down. I chased him. I used to beg him for, man, I'm working on it. Hey, I agree with you. I'd like to see that fight. And he's in another direction 5 minutes later, and he's booking other guys to fight. He's got a lot to do. You guys ever see that video where Colby Covington chased Dana White down and he found him at a casino and he had the whole thing running and Dana says, hey man, I'm on my private time. You guys remember that video? I had a similar incident except it was Lorenzo. I found out where Lorenzo was going tonight. I happened to be in town in Vegas. I show up there up to the dress code, of which, by the way, I don't really wear collared shirts. Pay my admittance, and then I go into a club. Oosh, there's lights going. Now I got to find him. He's down in a VIP section, which I can't get to, of which I have to hustle the guy who's trying to tell me I can't get there. Boom, get to Lorenzo. Ask him about the fight. And you know what? He was very nice to me. He was very happy to see me. He did not promise me anything. And another 2 months went by before I had that fight, which went down as the biggest fight ever at that time. So just to share for you, if you're a fighter and you think you're bringing something special to the table, so was I. Except I was right. I could prove it. I did prove it. And that's what I had to go through to get the fight. There's just a lot of things going on there. Lorenzo's like, yeah, I like that fight. I think that fight makes sense. Anderson's said a couple of times that he doesn't want to do it. That's where they were left. Well, get up Anderson's ass. Anderson said he doesn't want to do the fight. Anderson's not the boss. Get in his ass. We'll talk to him on Monday, and I think we can all come to terms. Didn't show any excitement, right? But there's a shrewdness. There's something going on here. There's a shrewdness. I'm dealing with a good businessman. But there's lessons in that too. And if somebody thinks they're going to come to the table, man, this is about, do you want to be world champion? What's this jobber's name that just knocked out that other bum? Ruiz. Ruiz knocked out that Anthony Joshua. And Ruiz is saying, yeah, I'll rematch him, but I want $50 million to do it. And Eddie Hearn's the promoter of that. And Eddie Hearn was real cool in an interview, and he said, hey, listen, that certainly isn't realistic. However, if he comes out and gets over on Anthony Joshua again, he is going to be looking at some of those numbers. Well, that's a pretty truthful answer. And you're not going to love to have it. You're going to want the bird in the hand. And before I make the walk to the locker room, I need to know for sure that I've got some security here, because I am going to stumble should I not come out on top. But again, if that's something you're worried about, you're probably in the wrong business. And the same as Eddie Hearn said that, and now Ruiz is like, okay, cool. Look, there's challenger money and there's champion money, and it's not the same money. There's still America. This is still capitalism. And incentives still matter. Incentives to rise to the top still matter, and there is different pay.
Chael, the man who fights more fierce than any creature from hell. My name is Kairos, and here's my question. With all of your combat sports experience competing and spectating, is there a line that cannot be crossed in terms of promoting a fight and trash talk? And if so, can you please give us an example of that? Thank you so much, sir. Have a great day.
Okay, well, yes. Most definitely the answer is yes. If you were to ask me what that line was, I will tell you, I would have to be like the Supreme Court on pornography when they put out an answer and said, we will know it when we see it. That's the law couldn't get any more specific than that, and my answer can't get any more specific than that. I wish I had a better one for you. I don't love bad language. That doesn't mean a guy can't use some bad language. You cannot touch your opponent, I will tell you that much. That is a line that is going too far. You can't be at a press conference and get close to a guy and then all of a sudden reach out and slap him. Can't touch him in any capacity. Same goes with the fan. The performer is largely, a good performer is going to try to work up an emotion in a fan. But the performer doesn't get to come out of the ring or the cage and then hit the fan. The fan, if they don't like the rate, doesn't get to go and hit the performer. So yes, there is definitely lines. If I was to tell you some that I thought that were crossed, I think if you went back and looked at Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis, the build-up for that fight, some of the things that went into that, some of the disgustingness where they did go too far. Not only did they put hands on each other, now you got cornermen and trainers and just a melee breaks out. I think that would probably be one of the greater examples that we've ever seen of something that just really got off of the tracks. But if I was to lay out a definition for you of this is okay and this is not okay, no. I couldn't do it. I couldn't articulate it. But I would know inappropriateness when I saw it.
Tawheen here from Bangladesh, and just wanted to ask you if you were aware that there are two types of Sambo, one being combat Sambo, which is essentially MMA with gis on, and the other, the grappling only Sambo. So when you say that Sambo isn't a real sport, and Khabib Nurmagomedov is not a true representative of Sambo, are you referring to the grappling only Sambo or combat Sambo, of which Khabib Nurmagomedov has been world champion? Thank you.
All right, so a couple of things here. First off, I'm not looking for some kind of beef with the 5 people around the world that do Sambo and love it, okay? But for me to say that it is not a real sport, I guess there's 3 things here. Second thing should be, no, I did not know that there was 2 sorts. You taught me something and I appreciate it. But for me to say that a sport is not a real sport, unless it has an official governing body that is recognized around the world, you cannot be world champion, okay? You simply cannot. I can tell you whatever world championship you're referring to is nothing more than a local tournament. I can tell you that. As an American, we will contest every sport ever made up. I don't give a damn if you want to play Foursquare. Our government will fund it and we will send a representative. Go check our America, World Championships, Olympic Games, any sport, any way you want to do it. Some people call equestrian a sport, which is ridiculous. We'll send a team. We'll put the horses on an airplane and go wherever you want to set that track up. So the pentathlon, we'll send a team. By the way, our government will fund any way you want to do it. You ping pong, wrestling, sports that matter. We'll even do swimming, right? any way you want to do it. Believe me, we don't have a Sambo team. Believe me, we will never have a Sambo team. And believe me, we as a country have never been invited. Never one time have we even been contacted and invited to come to the tournament. The reason I say that, it's not a real world tournament. It never was. You get a couple of Eastern Bloc guys together, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys in a bracket. If it's a big enough bracket, you go get a little gym somewhere because nobody's coming to watch. You hold an event and you call the guy the world champion. Man, I came from wrestling. I'm not looking to look down on somebody. That was my whole life. Wrestling in front of my mom and dad and a couple of buddies' mom and dad. Dedicated my life to. But to make believe that Sambo or that any kind of a world championship given out in a sport that isn't contested by the world, believe me, we do it here in America. We just call it the NFL. The NFL will happily tell anybody that will listen, it's the National Football League. All of the guys that play it and all of the media that cover it will call you a world champion if you can win it. But we don't invite the Cubans, do we? We don't invite the Serbs. We don't invite the Germans. We don't invite the Russians. We don't invite anybody that could give us any kind of a problem. Because we stack the deck. But then we call it a world championship. In fairness between you and I, and you taught me something, I'm really not looking for heat with the Sambo world. No, it is not a real sport. And anybody that claims to be a world champion in a sport that is not open to the world, much like our own football players right here in the U.S., we're being disingenuous.